Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We'll give it just another minute here to let everyone get in and get settled, and then we'll kick it off. All right, have a couple people still coming in. Just another couple seconds, and then we'll get started. All right. Well, thank you all for being here today. We're going to go ahead and kick this off so that we can get to the good stuff here. So, before we dive in, I just want to share a little bit about the series here today. So, my name is Sarah Kegrice. I am one of the co-chairs of professional development for the Virginia chapter. We want to welcome you to our session today. And I want to talk a little bit about the Southeast Regional Webinar Series. So, the ICF Southeast Regional Webinar Series is a collaboration between the 16 chapters in the Southeast region. It occurs about 10 times a year, which is what we were able to do this year. And the purpose of this professional development series is to offer continued learning opportunities by our established industry experts, which may not otherwise be available to a similar audience. We want you to be able to interact online with other coaches in our community and globally and engage in high quality professional development while earning your continuing education units. So we're excited to have you join us for this webinar today. So we are very excited to learn more about conflict management coaching from our expert, Cinnie Noble. Before we do, I want to just provide a few tips so that we can make the most out of our webinar experience today. Our speaker is going to pause for questions. She will have a couple of prompts where you can utilize chat and interact with her. But as we're going through, if you have any questions, please make sure that you are using the Q&A function. That will allow Angie and myself to ensure that all of your questions get answered. Additionally, I want to note that after our session today, you will be sent your CCEU certificate from your local chapter. So give us just a couple of days to get those sent out. And additionally, this is being recorded today, so the recording will be made available. All right, so I have the pleasure of welcoming our speaker today. Cinnie Noble is based in Toronto, Canada, and is a former lawyer with a Master of Law in Dispute Resolution. She is also a chartered mediator and professional certified coach. Since developing the CINERGY model of conflict management coaching over 20 years ago, Cinnie and her team coach clients worldwide and provide coach training in this model around the world. Cinnie was a board member of the International Coaching Federation and co-facilitated the conflict management coaching community of practice for the International Coaching Federation Global for 8 years. Cinnie is the author of 2 amazing coaching books, Conflict Mastery, Questions to Guide You, and Conflict Management Coaching, the CINERGY Model. You can learn more about her work and her team's work at CINERGYcoaching.com. So without further ado, I want to welcome Cinnie Noble. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody. And I am going to tell you a bit. One of the things that's also going to be shared is my slides. And there's an article that you're going to see as well that I wrote that you'll also get sent afterwards, those who've registered. So I want to thank Sarah and Angie and those who invited me to come and talk about my favorite topic these days. Well, it's been that way for about 20 years, one of my favorite topics, and I'm delighted to be here. I want to talk about this specialty and what makes it different from other kinds of coaching, at least in my experience. And I want to make sure by the end of our time together that we've looked at how conflict is defined and what this specific specialty is all about. In doing so, I want to share some really interesting research that I did about 20 years ago. I was a little over that, and in the development, and much that's sort of, I think you'll find interesting as it relates to other forms of coaching you might do. And generally, the differences that I'm going to share with you about what I have found over the years around what's different about coaching people who are in conflict. So I'm going to ask you to put in chat think about the last conflict you had, like an interpersonal conflict with family, friend, clients, anybody. And what word comes to your mind as you think about that? I'm going to ask Angie or Sarah to read out to me what you say. Actually, I could probably access chat here too. So what's the first word that comes to your mind about the last conflict you had with somebody? Competition. Misunderstanding. My chat is disabled. Well, there's a conflict right there, Jason. And you could, if you want to answer live. Oh, we have a number of people. So if that's the case, why don't we go into Q&A? And it looks like a couple of people. Frustrating, stress. Anybody want to go to Q&A to answer that question? Yeah. Okay. Uncomfortable, affects self-worth. Oh, infuriating. Not sure if you're talking about the chat or not, but I will say it's conflict. Frustration, powerless. Yes. Miscommunication. Oh my gosh. Disagreement. Yes. Reactive, tension, saboteurs, surprise. Oh, okay. High emotions. People feeling unheard. My last conflict. It was infuriating, exhausted. Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. Right. Sadness, disappointing, misunderstanding, wrong assumptions. Excellent. We're going to stop there. It is true. All of what you've said is how people experience conflict. Persistence on their part. Okay. And Andrew has raised a hand. I'm going to go on and to say that what you're describing is what happens when people come to conflict. They're describing the sorts of things that are going on for people. And that's all really important to us as coach to be able to get underneath it. It's not very often that anybody would say, oh, it's an opportunity. And in my world, which has been in over 20 years in the field of conflict, when people start to see the opportunity that there is in conflict, then there's a shift. And so I'll be talking about that as we go further. And one of the things around looking at definitions of conflict, there are so many of them. And some of them are like the incompatible differences between people. One definition is that it's simply the cracks in the system. Kind of like that. So I think of Leonard Cohen, where the light gets in. Another one is a condition between interdependent people, which isn't always the same, right, with conflict, but it could be between interdependent people in which one or both feel angry at the other and perceive the other being at fault. What's important about conflict is that you don't need to have another person to be in conflict. You can feel in conflict with somebody, and they may not know that you're in conflict with them. So it takes just one person perceiving that something's amiss. That person experiences some negative emotions about the other person and usually perceives the other person as at fault for something. And it's often the incompatibilities about how we view something that we both have in front of us and that we are disagreeing on, that we would see differently, that we have different assumptions about. And all of that can lead to conflict. Through the research that I did, one of the things that I had found that was so common was that conflict occurs when we experience something important to us is being undermined, threatened, or challenged. And most commonly, those things ended up being values, needs, or some aspect of our identity. So think about that conflict that you had in mind. And what was the other person saying or doing where you felt undermined? And was the value, was it a need, was it some aspect of your identity? And that would go to you're the boss, or you're the parent, or something that is who you would identify yourself as, and what they said or did undermine that. So the commonality of that was really important as I found it out. I'd been in the field by that time, about 15 years as a lawyer, as a mediator, and then as a coach. And I've been realized, mostly in law and mediation, those of you online who are mediators would know you're usually dealing with issues in dispute. What's underlying that, as I found out, was much more around people's experience of one another in terms of something important to them that is being challenged. So people didn't say this is my value or this is my need. It came out of the research that I did, which I'm going to tell you about. That will give it a little bit more context even. So what is conflict management coaching? It's also known as conflict coaching. I found that when I started out, I called the specialty conflict coaching. And then I found when I was actually talking about what it was, that people understood the concept of conflict management coaching better than conflict coaching. So I continue to use that. So it is one-on-one. You can use the model you're going to learn about if with groups, but I do one-on-one work. And I can't really tell you a lot about how it's done with groups, but I know people I've trained do that. I mean, I can give you an idea of it, but this is going to be about one-on-one process. So a trained coach supports clients to gain increased competence and confidence to manage and engage in their interpersonal conflicts and disputes. That is those are lots of words, and it is an explanation of it, of what the coaching is all about. And we talk in the coaching field about people wanting to be a better version of themselves, and this would be about people who want to be a better version of themselves when it comes to engaging in conflict. And you notice that I use the word engagement about conflict, and not more. I use it more than I like to use the word manage, because over time what I realized was that people really wanted to be in conflict, because it's inevitable. It's going to be in our workplaces, our homes, our boards, wherever that is. And to be able to actually engage in conflict is a feat, and it's something that people want to learn how to do, especially people who are in the face of conflict all the time. So I want to give you some examples of how I use it and why people would come to me. So this wasn't always the case, that people would come before a conflict had erupted. It increasingly became that way as conflict management coaching became an accepted specialty and niche, as coaching cultures grew. So before conflict are the clients who say, I am about to deliver a really hard message to my team. I know I'm going to get pushback. I know who it's going to be from, and I want to be better able to, because I just usually flare. So it's anticipated conflict, difficult conversations that people have to make. I have a lot of people in the managerial positions who have to deliver performance appraisals. So anticipating, one of the reasons that people have trouble with that is they anticipate conflict, aren't really able to engage in conflict very well, and so they want to learn better skills about being able to do that. But lots of examples of the before. As I said, it wasn't always common before. When I found out, because we train not only in North America, Canada, and US, but in different parts of the world, that generally people go for any kind of assistance after the fact. So when it comes to conflict, many people wouldn't go for coaching until it already happened. That's still often the case, and then we found this in other parts of the world as well. It's only, I would say, more in the last maybe 8 to 10 years of my practice that there are people that are much more preparing for conflict. And that comes in organizations where they might give a new manager, a new leader, the opportunity to have coaching, and somebody might pick a specialty to be around conflict. We all know that if we're talking about organizational world, that many people become leaders and are managing people, and they might be terrific at their work, but not great at people skills, and particularly managing conflict. So that's been a growth area for me during conflict. I also get many people coming when conflict has already begun. There's dispute going on between people, and they are realizing this could just go off the rails, could escalate. What am I going to do about it? So it's about, I would think of before conflict is preventing unnecessary escalation. During conflict is preventing the conflict from evolving and escalating to beyond where it needs to be, becoming more toxic. After conflict, so it's interesting over time as coaching, and I know I really attribute ICF and coaching organizations who have done a really great job of shifting the thought that coaching had to do with counseling and people are being punished or something of that nature, which is what, when I first started, that's how people saw coaching. So after conflict, often people are coming because they are realizing, based on some dispute that they've had, that they just don't do it. Often it's because they keep on doing the same thing over and over, and they find themselves totally frustrated with how to engage in conflict and are looking after the fact, I've got to figure out what to do when this happens, when I'm triggered by this person or when I'm triggered by that kind of behavior or words. So the after conflict has certainly developed as well in my practice, when people start to realize, and it might be because they have to, they've been told, there's been an investigation, there's been some audit of their workplace or other if they're on a board or community center, wherever it might be, where they've been told they need to get help. And it's often after there's been at least one conflict. When I first started this, long ago, my hope, my wish was that this would attract people who know already that they're not really very good at conflict, and they want to go and strengthen their competence. They know where they're not doing very well. They are frustrated with themselves. Other people are frustrated with them. And as I mentioned earlier, it took a long time before people would look at conflict management coaching as something to engage in, before conflict erupts. Conflict competence is not just about a dispute. It's about a general habit, general way that people are engaging in conflict that has got them into trouble, or they realize it's not going to work. So they come not because they're in a dispute or they're anticipating one, but because they have a lot ongoing of repetitive kinds of conflict, and they want to strengthen their competence in general. And the last one that I'll refer to is for those of you who do work in the field of mediation, that used as before mediation, so when people are going to participate together. I've actually, some coaches who have contacted me in the past are also have been involved in doing mediations by virtue of where they're in, if they're part of an organization and they want some assistance with that. And so for pre-mediation or after mediation or other kind of process that people are going to go into, and this has included people going into grievances, facilitated discussions of all sorts. So it's preparing people for that. So I'm going to just stop for a minute and see if any questions have come. So remember to put them in Q&A, and Angie will let me know if anything has come so far. Nothing so far?
Don't see anything.
Nothing so far.
Okay, thank you. So I do want to tell you about the research because I think it's a really important part of why I do what I do. And I'm going to tell you about the model in a few minutes and why it is what it is. And I think that's important for you to know. So I actually didn't know how I was going to develop a model. I'd been in the conflict management field for a long time, and I did know a lot about conflict, I thought, but I realized that I hadn't really figured out what is it that people would go to coaching that I don't know about when it comes to the field of conflict. How am I going to find that out? So kind of intuitively, more than anything, I started research. I went to organizations where I had been a mediator, and this included public and private sector. I went to some boards. I went to a community center, several community centers. I went to a couple of churches and synagogues, and I asked for people who had been in conflict who would like to be part of a research on, what would assist people in looking at conflict differently, or in being being able to manage themselves, how to engage in conflict. So because I had worked in law and mediation, I realized that so often those processes don't really deal with the fact about what are people experiencing. And after all those years, I came to realize through the research that I'm going to tell you about that it's the experience that people are facing, what goes on for them when it comes to being just off their stance, what's happening for them, what's going on, that they are starting to feel very uncomfortable. And I realized by the end that neuroscience principles, coaching principles, and conflict management principles all come together to be able to take people through a model that is linear. So before I tell you what that model is, in the research, I asked people intuitively, it occurred to me to say, well, tell me about the last interpersonal dispute, because I was aiming to do interpersonal disputes here. Tell me about your last interpersonal dispute. And they gave me permission to record and to write, which I did, how they told their stories. And incidentally, I did find out that people didn't like the word stories being used because it's not a story, but how they related their conflicts and disputes. And after I had done about 25, I sat back and redid the tapes and what I had written down. And I started to see a pattern of the way people told their situations. So I went back to those people. I ended up, altogether, I had, by the end of doing all this, I had 155 situations that people had conveyed from all the people that I had talked to. And I went back to people in groups. So I had small focus groups, and I went back and I said, okay, so this is what I found, but I want to check it out. And so I asked them to follow along as what I'd heard. And sure enough, people said, yeah, isn't that interesting? It's kind of like what you did. And I thought, boy, how come I never understood or knew that there's sort of a trajectory that people go through? The research also started to open up a sense about what was necessary in order to coach people through their conflicts to what was that going to be? What was the other side of that? And, not surprisingly, not everybody wants to make it pretty. Some people have a really, tough time with conflict, and in that, and they want to tell somebody off. Not, no, they're not trying to be conciliatory, which is what many people think, and that conflict, when you go to conflict coaching, that people are trying to make it better. Making it better has a whole life of its own in terms of what people are really wanting out of a situation. So not surprisingly, when it came to looking at, I told you that neuroscience principles, coaching, and conflict management ones all entered in ultimately to what was going on. So we know it's been around for a while in our field, a lot of talk about neuroscience. A lot of this won't be new to you, but I think what's important is most people coming to us when we're coaching, and this goes for a lot of issues, but not just conflict, is that they are operating from a very emotional place. And that would be the amygdala and the limbic system. And they're not able yet to think things out with their executive functions. So when people come in that state, then what has to happen for them to shift? And that is moving from a reaction to reflection to response, and ultimately resilience. So I think of those as the 4 R's, but that's not part of the model. That's kind of how it evolves, that people come and they're usually reactive. So what's important too around this is that many people have told their conflict to many, many people, and they aren't necessarily in a highly agitated state when they come. They don't like bringing it up. They don't really like talking about it, but one person might not be as highly engaged in their amygdala as other people are. So it's always important to be keeping in mind that the idea is whatever reaction they're experiencing about the conflict, that they're not going to be able to do the work until they're able to move into the executive functions. So we probably, most of you probably know that already from your work. It's really important in conflict, of course, because so many people, like an intake, we're going to be hearing about that, what's happened to them, and it can spark off, in fact, activate all the more that part of their brain that needs to be settled somewhere along the line. So go back to the conflict you were thinking about and bring that to mind. And if you don't want to consider that one, because I want to go through and show you how people told their stories. And it helps if you take in your mind, come to mind with, what was that interpersonal dispute with the other person that I want to analyze here. So the not so merry-go-round of conflict was actually named by my first study group that I had. And this is the cycle of conflict that was so telling, that's kept on repeating itself. Some changes somewhere along the line, but it starts at the precipitating interaction at the top. So think about that interaction. That's the first piece. So think about what happened, what you said, what the other person said, what was going on between the two of you. And in that conversation, if you go down the right side, it is, what specifically did the person say or do that bugged you, where you realize you're getting provoked? And this could have happened years ago. It could have started long ago, and a more recent incident has sparked it off. So think about, in that one, was there an earlier time where you got triggered by something that someone said or did? And think about, what was it? It could have been something they didn't say or do that you would have wanted them to do. Underlying that is a value, need, or aspect of your identity. So think about that. What, by them doing whatever it was that you identified, what of values of yours or needs or your identity did you experience was being undermined, even at some state of consciousness that now you're thinking about, but you might not have at the time? So think about what that was, what was important to you that you would have been triggered. So triggered is reaction. This is what you're experiencing internally. This is the right side of the merry-go-round, is what's going on in the brain. And once you've got that in mind, think about, what was the impact? How did you experience that? Now, there's a word I use, a reason I use the word impact as opposed to what were your emotions. What I found was that when I use different language, and we also know a lot about how important language can be, but impact, people would say more than what they were experiencing emotionally. I'm not sleeping, I'm clenching my fist every time I see the person, I can feel my jaw get tight. And all of that's pretty important, because it helps in the coaching model to be able to look at measurement by what's happening now and see what's different, on what scale. And so more than just the emotions are really important. People, generally, I would say 99% talk about their emotions when you ask about impact. But there's a percentage of people that don't. And when asked impact, there's a lot more. So think about the impact on you, how you would describe it, what words you would use. And then the next thing that happens is people made assumptions about why the person did or said what they did. They look at their motive or their intent. So think about that for you. When looking at what they said or did, what motive did you attribute why they did that? So I want to go back, keep that in mind. This internal conflict is, what you're experiencing about in the brain, and what's happening for you, and having discovered this by experience of my groups. Somebody sent me an article from one of the first times I taught the workshop, and two neuroscientists out of California had identified the same trajectory around emotional regulation. So the same tendency to do this in your brain, even at an unconscious level, is there. There's some tendency to go on that sequence. So carrying on with the merry-go-round, you've got that right side of the merry-go-round, the internal part. It may or may not have crossed a boundary, meaning it going too far. Did it like, okay, I've had enough now. And that you may or may not externalize it at that point. So for instance, think about when someone's crossed a boundary for you, but you don't say or do anything, you keep it inside. They may pick it up though. So an external reaction is they can tell something's wrong, but if it's not said or expressed, then they may not know really what's going on. So in the conflict stories that people told in their situations, they would talk about what just went too far. And when it was externalized, how they reacted once that happened and the consequences of that, going up the left side. That external dispute was going up there from up to the consequences part, and externalizing it is typically what engaged the other person in their conflict, what was going on for them. So that common way of people explaining became such an important part of a conflict analysis to look at patterns that people have. And I thought that was pretty critical to, if we had better insights into what happened for us, what would we do with that? How could we manage then, having more insights? And this is taking people into the reflective part. So I can't tell you why this occurred to me, but I thought, I wonder if the same people could track what they observed about the other person. So, and do the same merry-go-round, considering where the other person's coming from. So I'm going to operate on the basis that you followed this. There might have been a boundary crosser. You externalized it, and there were consequences. And you've thought about, what are the consequences here? So taking the same merry-go-round and looking at, from the other person's point of view, how would they describe what happened? The top precipitating interaction, how would they describe what happened between the two of you? And what would they say you said or did that set them off, looking down at the trigger point? What did that underlie for them? So I'm hoping you're doing this. Think about what was the interaction? How would they describe it? If I said, hey, what do you suppose they'd say happened? And what would they say sort of put them off that you said or did? Sometimes it could be a look on your face or something, and ask that question. And what did that undermine for them? Just like I asked you about values and needs and identity, what was it for them? What did you see as the impact? So you're doing it all as, what did you observe or experience? So some people can tell you because they actually heard things, so they know what happened, and other people would observe it, including the impact on them. What did you observe as the two of you were in having this dispute going on? And what assumptions might they have made about you, why you did what you did or said what you did? So it's taking people on the same ride on the merry-go-round and looking at that, and then saying, at what point did you see that you might have crossed the boundary for them? And how did they react? And what are the consequences? So take yourself through from the impact, and then what assumptions could they have made? How, when, what happened to cross their boundary? How did they react? And what were the consequences for them? So when that merry-go-round is done for both people, and they were able to look back, they were able to sit back from it all. So they can't do that until they've expressed what's going on for them, and that there is a movement to, let's start to analyze this. And that's where you move into this part of the model. So, and I'm going to go through the model with you and show you where this fits in, but I just want to stop to see if there are any questions when you took yourself through that, any insights, and just put them in the, I guess, chat or Q&A. Let me know if there is anything that you learned. Anything there?
Cinnie, there are 3 questions in the Q&A. So
Okay.
Galen Carpenter asked, how do you help someone own the competency when they think the issue is just the other person's behavior?
Oh, that's a great one. Galen. Well, that's often how we experience this conflict, is that we tend to go to blame. And not everybody does, of course, but it's a common way that we will look at when we're in a conflict. And the more entrenched we are in someone's blame, the more blame we lay on somebody and see them as at fault. So part of what goes on in the merry-go-round is looking at their part of it. And so some of it isn't, you cannot really do an analysis until people have had a chance to, tell you what's gone on for them. And sometimes it's, I love questions, and sometimes it's the questions you ask, what part of that wouldn't they agree with? Or if they just heard all that you said, what would they say? No, you're off on that one. So sometimes it's trying to see if you can get that. If people are really entrenched and they don't go there very easily, some of it's really about how you handle the merry-go-round, which is, well, let's break that down a bit more. And you give people lots of time looking at their part of the merry-go-round, and then say, so let's hear what they'd say. You can still get there in a slow, methodical way of acknowledging that they're quite convinced the other person's to blame, but doing the analysis usually shifts those people. I've had loads of people over the years that see that, and some of it is very difficult to step back from, because there's also shame that's involved in that. What I find is that people are ashamed of what they said or did, and they have trouble sharing that with the coach as well. So it's a time thing. It's spending the time and not rushing the process with people and letting them get hurt enough, and then using the language and questions that shift them. I see that there are questions about the R's. So the R starts with reaction. That's typically what we do. And the job of coaches is to shift people into the reflection part, which is the prefrontal cortex. That's actually the merry-go-round. Then to be able to respond instead of react. And then resilience is how they're going to move on from there, what they've learned, what they're going to apply. Everybody got that? Okay. So moving on from there, is there something else there?
Cinnie, Sarah is going to read off. There's several questions in the chat.
Yeah, I see that. Okay, Sarah, go ahead.
All right, let me scroll. Allison would like to know if there is a way to pause both parties in the midst of conflict. There are times when we know there's conflict. Is there a way to set up the conditions to be more successful in advance?
Sorry, just run that by me again. I missed that first part.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is there a way to pause both parties in the midst of conflict? When we know there is a conflict, is there a way to set up conditions to be more successful in advance?
This is if you're mediating people. I think that's what I was mixing up, because this is about one-on-one coaching, not mediation. So
yeah. Allison, if you want to put a little bit more in the chat or come off mute really quick and let us know what you were thinking there.
Allison?
Oh,
I'll go on.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Got it. Thank you so much. This is super helpful. That little button wasn't available just a second ago.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. You're talking about one-on-one. And sometimes even in a group, there is one person who's driving the entire conflict. And I just love what you're presenting here. I just wish there was a way to, when you enter into a planned meeting and there's existing conflict, there's already a lot of, water under the bridge. Is there a way to bring all of this awareness to a conversation and just set up the conversation for more success is what I'm curious about.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Allison. I think that it depends. I have had people who've gone into groups and who taken the training and have asked, permission to take the merry-go-round and to do it kind of a teach piece in front of the group. And to say, okay, so, it happens in groups that, somewhere along the line, people spark one another. And I just wanted to give you a confident analysis that could happen so that you can build some of your own insights about what's going on for you here so that we can, have the best meeting, or that you can be more aware, something of that nature. And then walk people through the merry-go-round, do as I did, ask them to think about a conflict. One of the things, I do know somebody who did this, who said that they said, think about somebody in the room who bugs you, and it was a bad idea to do it that way. So do a general learning about, what bring to mind, a dispute. We're just going to look at what happens to our brains when we're in conflict. And I think people find that interesting and informative to find out more about what happens to the brains, and then walk people through. And then there's always another side when you do the other merry-go-round, the precipitating interaction. So let's look at what could be going on for the other person. And I think that I often would say in that context, I imagine that just as you're bugged by somebody, they might be bugged by you too. And, something that just makes playful, make it light, but be really serious about it being a conflict analysis. I think a teach piece is helpful. And then if anything kind of comes up in a group, I guess you could do something about it. So something's triggering you there, like what's going on, something, I don't know, depending on the group, how much you can actually raise it or have people identify it. It may not be a good idea, but I think the understanding might alone move people into more thinking about what's going on for them. That would be my thought, Allison.
Yeah, thank you. More awareness is always good.
Yeah. And there's some more questions.
There are. So Cinnie, I wanted to see, do you want to keep taking questions? Do you want to keep going and I can mark where we are with questions?
Let's take a few more questions.
All right. So let's see.
Pertinent to where we're at.
We are with Lisa Walsh's question, and time stamped at 1:07. She went through conflict with a friend she hasn't spoken to for about 6 months. How can I possibly open the door to resolve it and possibly save our friendship?
Great. Why don't we save that one till a little bit later? What I would do though, Lisa, is walk yourself through the merry-go-round about what happened and what might have happened for that person before you do anything. Actually, let's not save it. I would think that's always a good idea, is for people, if you start to think about what happened and what was my part of it here. When I first took conflict management, the key was, how do you stand in somebody else's shoes? Well, that's pretty hard to do. And this was the closest thing I found to be able to do that. I think ladder of inference is another tool that some people use. This to me, once I was actually able to track people, became the tool of choice. But I think once you've done that, I think one of the things that people do is to be able to go back saying, I've thought a lot, and I thought about my part of this, and I'd really like to share that with you. Something where you are owning some responsibility, or at least you want to own it. And I think some of that is what happens in conflict. Commonly, people are afraid. That's happened to me as well. Until you can kind of see your part of it, then you do to go back to that first question too about you blame. And it's getting there that's really important. So I guess I'd like to assume that people on this call are going to be thoughtful and think about, that, walk yourself through, and then be able to be honest about what you think you might have done and you'd like to be clarified. You'd like it clarified. That would be my best thought right now. I see a question about, can a mindfulness practice, help with this? Yeah, I think reduce the impact of all the steps. Yes, I think for sure. I think mindfulness is absolutely what we can all benefit from. Whether you introduce it with your clients in confidence or not is strictly up to you and your practice and how you do that. I think anything that's going to move people outside of their amygdala is going to help, and if that works, absolutely.
Wonderful. And
let's take one more and then we'll go back.
Sure, absolutely. So we'll get to Kelly's question here. How can you make people aware that sometimes they bring irritation from unrelated sources into their conflicts with other people?
How can you make, well, the awareness comes from people, I find, analyzing. So there's never a time in the coaching work that I do that I suggest that or give an opinion or give advice. So I mean, we know that those are some basic tenets of coaching, and there might be a tendency in conflict to give some thoughts, opinions more than some other forms of coaching. I don't know. I've heard that from people, coaches I've trained. But I think that you can't, it's really about how do you move people outside of their amygdala and to think things out. And so I guess if the question is, how do you do that really? Would that be the essence of that question? How do you move people? What would you say?
Yes, and Kelly, if you wanted to add anything else, you can. That was the sense that I'm getting is almost bringing awareness that maybe something that's happening in this moment isn't necessarily related to the moment.
Oh, I see. I missed that. I thought it was, well, I think we don't know if that's the case. So I think rather than assuming that, I would do much more about, how is that related here, or what impact do you think that had? Like, I think it's really just being able to see if there's a link and ask the question. I don't know if that answers that or not, because I was missing whether it was how to bring awareness. Yeah, I think, one of the things that I wonder about often, especially when I'm doing training, is that because we are intuitive human beings and we are used to doing that we tend to bring a lot of assumptions of our own into the practice. And it happens a lot, and I find it happens a lot in conflict management coaching that people tend to do that. And so I think that, do we know, Kelly, if that was really what's going on? And if it's more of I'm not sure how that's related, could you tell me? Then that might help you more. I don't know if that's, Kelly, you've raised your hand. So is something else more you want to add about that?
Oh yeah. So I wasn't saying like in the moment of coaching to make those assumptions. I'm just saying in general, we know that in these situations that is a tendency of people that they actually do this. But in the moment of coaching, we wouldn't assume that. So I think I answered my own questions. Just basically walk them through the process, and they're moving into the prefrontal cortex, into the executive function. They'll get to that conclusion on their own, which is what we want.
Yeah, that's true. But I think if there is something that's still unrelated, or you don't get the link, is to just ask that for sure. It may not be part of what you're doing. Well, let's move on. And yes, if you could, Sarah, just hold on wherever we were, and because okay, that's great. Thank you. All right, so we're going to go, and I'm going to walk through the model with you. So it starts at clarifying the goal. Unlike what we learn as coaches, what's your goal for today? That's not what you do with people in conflict. They usually come for a number of sessions. I have an average of 8 sessions for clients, about 45 minutes each. It's what's the goal that you have about the conflict, and it's not a today thing. So that's differentiates this, and I'm going to go through the differentiation near the end today. But it's finding out, what are you hoping to achieve by coming to coaching, by conflict management coaching? What is it? And it's typically an action. I have to get better at. I need to do this. I want to be kinder with this person. I have to learn how to do X. It's usually something quite concrete that does not take your 45 minutes or half hour, whatever period of time that you've designated. So that is the first part. The second is what happened. What happened that brought you here? So this is where you find out what's gone on for the person, and finding out what's most important to you about all that. Name the elements is the merry-go-round. So think merry-go-round, and it's so what you do is, once you've inquired about the situations, let's analyze it. Let's break that down a bit further. And I think of it as deconstructing the conflict, because you're going to put it back together again and reconstruct it later on. So name the elements, think merry-go-round, and saying to people, we're going to analyze that a bit more and take people through the merry-go-round. Once they've done that, they've started a shift in the prefrontal cortex, and if they haven't, you stay there longer about the analysis. One of the things that new coaches often do that doesn't work is move too quickly through the elements. It's a slow process. You're asking people to really slow down, and that's something that a lot of people in conflict don't do naturally. They react quickly, and so it's just starting to shift the whole idea of how do you get to that thinking part and tell people what you're doing. I'm really transparent about what I do. So then going to explore the choices. Excuse me, I'm just getting over sore throat. You can probably hear some hoarseness. So what are your choices here? You said you'd like to do this. Any other choices occur to you? Because sometimes once people break it down, they change their mind about what they want to do. So you're not stuck. You don't have to do what it is that you've said, but you might change your mind, or you might come up with a few things. Or maybe I could do this, or maybe I could do that. And in this stage, you look at the pros and cons of those. What's a good thing about that? It's not such a good thing about that. How might the other person think about that? So you want to, once you've brought the person into the room, the other person, then you want to see, with that choice, how would that be for the other person? Excuse me again. So you explore the choices. So again, this could take over 5 or 6 sessions, and you just pick up where you leave off every time. After exploring choices, you then look at how to reconstruct it. So how will you go forward? People could rehearse, they could practice, they could do any number of things that will be, what's going to be different about me? How will I make this better? If they, excuse me, if it's something the other person doesn't know about, it's not a reconstruction so much as it is, how will you make the situation happen? So a lot happens in this stage about people starting to look at what they're not going to do, but what they are going to do, and practicing that. And or just going out and trying something with the other person that could be different from what they usually do. I just had a client who decided that he was not being very nice to one of his coworkers, and he said that he was going to start to say hello to the person. This happened about 2 weeks ago, and he said the other person looked at him and said, "Are you talking to me?" And that my client laughed, and he said it just kind of broke the ice for a moment, like they had not been speaking for over a year. So it really is about, let's get in touch with who the best version of yourself when it comes to managing conflict. What would that be? And then once you've got that sorted out, it's what's going to get in the way of you going ahead. We always do that. So this follows classic framework, a coaching framework, and so this one is around what's going to stop you from going ahead with this. And then the last stage is, okay, what's the commitment, when, all of that. It's all of what's going to logistically, what's needed, when it's the impetus to move ahead. I always give some kind of, or ask people to what they want to work on between sessions. Once people get into this, so one of the biggest things I find with people who, are kind of fast twitches when it comes to conflict, they move really quickly, is slowing people down really works for people enough to be able to be more thoughtful. Go into the mindfulness question, that sort of just slower, moving the brain down, moving the emotions down, all of that. People will you will see over time, at least I do, that they've started to slow down. Once they've done name the elements, the third one, you can actually see a shift. And usually that's where some insights come and people start to think differently. So that's always the hope that that's going to happen. And it does a lot of the time, that people really are needing the time to look closely at their conflict in a way that they aren't used to. So I'm going to stop again to see if there are questions about the model. Let's stick to questions about the model, and then when I finish, we'll do more other kinds of questions that might come up. Anything else that people have?
Looks like as related to the model, describe again what is ground the challenges.
Ground the challenges. So you've already asked and reconstruct. You've dealt with all the challenges of doing whatever they want to do. Ground the challenges is, now that you've figured it out, what could stop you from moving ahead here? And that's usually, if you've done your job well up until now, they're usually, it usually ends up being logistics. What if they won't meet with me? What if they delete my email? Like it's something of that nature. But it's just, what's going to stop you? Procrastinators might say, it all sounds fine now, but I'm not sure I've got the nerve to get on with it. And then you're going to coach around nerve, get on with it.
Wonderful. And one more came in. Can you review name the elements?
Name the elements is the merry-go-round that we just did. It's walking people through the merry-go-round. Okay. Seems the trigger portion of the merry-go-round is rich ground to plow in coaching, since this could come up in a variety of conflict scenarios. Any strategy used there? Yeah, it's a great question too, Lisa. So trigger point is, what you want to be careful about with trigger points is, what in that situation was the trigger for you, because it could vary. The same trigger that bothers you about somebody may not bother you if somebody else does it. So it's specific to the person, the situation, and so it's indeed rich with a lot of what started you, what do you hold near and dear that got challenged just now. And you don't go for a lot of triggers. You get specific to this, what started it for you. So that's where I would spend time to find that. So it may come up in other conflict scenarios. What's different, Lisa, is that it's maybe not the same with another person, or the same values may not be undermined, or needs or identity with another person or another situation. So while it might seem certain things trigger, so let's think about that. You could be always triggered by somebody who is condescending, no matter who they are. So it's still looking at what's underneath that for you that people can apply generally. So I find that once people know the merry-go-round, they use it after. It's a useful tool. Once they've used it correctly and it works for them, then I've had people coming back saying, okay, so I've looked at this trigger here, and that's what happened the last time. So there's an identification of what's going on. And to your point, Lisa, if it comes up with somebody else, some of the same underlying values, his identity could be there, but sometimes different. So it's helpful for people to see what happened there. But the concept of being condescended to could go across the board for a lot of people. So I know strategy-wise, I think it's, I'll tell you what happens, because this makes me think about when you're dealing with people who are trying to shift some of their conflict behavior. You do want to name 3 situations. You do want to get more information about when something's happened, so that you get the variety of what kinds of things, what sorts of people, so that people become more alert about what have you learned about what triggers you, what is it, and where does it go to, and what else is going on for you at that time. You do more exploration in that kind of coaching when people are trying to shift a behavior generally and increase their conflict competence. Okay, so let me wind up and then we'll go back to some questions. Or is it wind down? Wind up, wind down. Okay. So let me just take this off here. I want to go through the things that distinguish the distinguishing factors. It's not going here. Here we go. The underlying principles, so it takes in all of those: coaching, conflict management, and neuroscience. The linear format. The linear format, I was surprised. I was used to, when I did general executive coaching, much more fluid kind of process. I followed this basic framework that we learned. But what I found, and I figured that would be the case with people in conflict, I found that people, well, in fact, someone said, and I put it in my book, that it takes the chaos out of conflict. The process of telling people, so when coaches do this, and they're doing other kinds of coaching, and someone brings up a conflict, they'll say, okay, I have a process that I'm going to work with specifically around the conflict. And then that is what they will work on. And so it's much more linear than you might have been working at. And I found that step-by-step process starts to slow down the brain itself. It's because people jump ahead, just say, I'm going to get there. let's just go here first. And that also slows down the brain from where people generally might go and jump to. So the pace is of that nature. The pace is slower. We need to model that and ourselves look at it and of course deal with conflict ourselves, but also to slow down the process and be comfortable with that. When you get clients who are going to say, but I've just got to get this sorted, and they're anxious to get there, to be really be careful about jumping ahead to just, redo what they're used to doing. I've told you about the goal identification, that it's a goal. I reassess goal every session, but it's, again, what are you hoping to get out of conflict management coaching? And then I'm going to talk about some core competencies otherwise that I think are really important. So you are going to get an article that I recently wrote in the past year. This is based in part on research and based also on my practice over the years. So we learn about the importance of summarizing, paraphrasing, and reframing, and I use these all the time. And as a mediator, they were core competencies as a mediator, and learned them when I was coaching. And what I found that I started to question was really the efficacy of them and usefulness of them over time. And I have, as a consequence of what I have learned, I'm going to give you some of why these don't work so well. Now, I did run this by, I have a peer group of coaches, and I said to them, what do you think about what I have found? And I shared with them what I'm sharing with you, and they said, I feel that way about some of these, 2 of these skills as well, even 3. So I'll give you that input. Summarizing, there's a tendency once people, like in the I stage, tell you what's gone on for them, to summarize. And the study groups did not like summarizing. They said, I don't need to hear back what I just heard. Or why did you say summarize that part? Or, that isn't all that's going on. Or I just want to talk. I just want to get heard. An interesting thing that I found was that people would often say, in the I stage, you just listen. You don't summarize or paraphrase, just listen. And people say, you're the first person who's actually listened to me and hasn't offered advice or try to think about, what's really going on for me. Often people haven't really told everything they need to say. So summarizing, for some people, tended to minimize what was going on for them. It felt like, well, I guess that's what coaches have to do, but, I don't need to hear it again. So I do not summarize with my coaching clients. I might paraphrase, depending on whether there's lack of clarity, but I don't make a habit of paraphrasing for a similar reason. And one of the things that came out of that was people saying, I wonder why you just chose that part to paraphrase. That wasn't as important as this part. And people would defer to us. Because I did this with other coaches that helped with, as I was developing the model, that wasn't a necessity for people. When people get caught up in what they're talking about, doing, learning, gaining, analyzing, repeating it isn't what they need to hear or want to hear. It doesn't mean never. It just means be careful about how much you rely on skills that in the middle of somebody talking or analyzing or starting to move into the prefrontal, it requires them to be listening to you, not themselves. So just to be careful about that. I do paraphrase some, and sometimes that's if something's not clear, or when you said this, I wasn't getting what you were experiencing about that, something where it requires more information, but I'm showing that I'm hearing. So I don't say wipe it off, but just be careful that we don't make it a habit of doing each and every time if you're used to doing it. And then when it came to reframing, so I have found that I've done a lot more of not using my intuition, but using asking the client to use theirs. So what I think all of us would say we're pretty intuitive, and I would say that, and strong instincts. But when I found that I was doing much more deferring to the client about everything, just so much more magical things happen. So if I said to somebody, what are your instincts telling you? there? You know, what's coming to your mind that when you said this, something that has them identifying it rather than me, it's far more powerful. And insights, as you probably know some from the neuroscience, are important to be repeated more than one time. So if people say that, I always make a note of it and then raise it at the end saying, you know, what are your insights? Because it could have fallen off. But the idea about being able to think out what is going on that I'm thinking, what's my intuition here, is powerful for people to do it on their own. You probably know that already, but I'm not saying, again, that it's not a bad idea if people are struggling with it. But I actually find when people are struggling with it, that they come up with something and it's a bigger aha as a consequence. So the other thing about reframing when we tend to make something more positive is that people confident often say, I don't want to make positive. I'm feeling lousy. Like, I don't want to make this, oh, well, at least you can sort things out. I'm not there. And so some of it is being really mindful of where the client is at and not trying to shift it into something that it isn't. That if people are feeling really negative, that's where they need to be for now. And to be able to shift from that will be something that they can do on their own with a lot of listening, and then start and following the sequence of the model will do that. And if you've gone too quickly, you'll need to go back. And it's evident when people are learning this that they can go too quickly, and that clients will often, you know, people who are introspective and have done a lot of thoughts about it have already thought out a lot of things that you're going to discover as you go through the model. But slowing it down is what helps, I find, people to let things land a bit differently and get to, you know, what else is going on that they haven't yet identified. So you will get this article as well to read, to see what I'd said, is develop a little bit more there. So let's go back in the last while, look at what other thoughts and questions have I missed that we can answer here.
All right, let's see. I'm going to go back to our chat and capture one. So we have one here from Amber. As clients go through this process, as they reflect, do they often alter their boundaries? What are some of the common insights that clients gain?
Do they alter their boundaries? You mean at the time or afterwards that they have an insight about their boundaries?
What were you thinking there, Amber?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yes, I was just thinking, you know, as they were thinking through the process, as they were reflecting and thinking about the boundaries, the assumptions that they had about other people and where they felt that their boundaries needed to be, as they reflected and thought through the process, if their boundaries shifted, if they started to see themselves in a different way, and how that reflected on the boundaries that they established between themselves and others.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a bit tricky. So what happens often when people, let's go to the assumption part, which happens before the boundaries. Once people have started to identify what it is that that they're assuming about the other person's intent, sometimes questions that will say, what else would we go, what else did you assume about them? What's your, what was your intent? Their boundary is pretty solid. It's because of the assumptions that have built up. And the right side of the merry-go-round can go on for years, and the more it builds up, the stronger it is, and the more assumptions people make. Boundary crossers are what all of us have as something. If someone says or does that, that's gone too far for me. It's sort of something that we've developed over time. It's part of our, what our ethics, our moral principles. So boundaries don't change, and it's good to have boundaries, and it's good to identify people that goes too far for me. What happens though is that when people start to get insights as they go through the merry-go-round, is that their assumptions start to change. And they might look back and say, well, about the boundary, maybe they didn't mean to do that. Or, maybe I need to own that. But generally, boundaries are our boundaries. And so it's really good to look at what is it that people say or do that go too far. And if they didn't know that, what do we need to do? So often there'll be people that will say one of the things they want to do as their goals is to let the other person know what they, how much they offend them by continually doing X, whatever that is. I don't know if that helps to explain that.
Yes, thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Another question?
Great. I'm going to jump back over to the Q&A. We have a couple of questions in there. So on the part around assumptions, we have a question. What is the question as a coach or an individual that you need to ask themselves in the assumptions part of the model? Is it, and they have this in quotes, what assumptions may I be making that are causing your or my reaction?
Yeah, so assumptions are linked to the trigger. When they did that, why do you suppose they did it? What was your reasoning, or what do you think? So it's all linked to the, where you've started at the top of the merry-go-round. So that's what you're finding out is when they said that, where did your mind go? What was your thinking about that? Not everybody likes the word assumption. So it's, what do you suppose they intended? So those are the kinds of questions that I would ask. Could it be that more than one got triggered? Yeah, sure that could. But usually if you say what started it, what was the thing, it's better to focus on one and analyze it. Typically it's more of the same, or it's what they come up with first about where things started that is critical. But if they come up with a few, I would just say, which one do you want to analyze?
Wonderful. And we have a question here around accountability in the Q&A. So is accountability, the client holding themselves accountable following the coaching session, part of the commitment?
Yeah, so it is part of looking at what they working on between sessions, because most people do have something they want to do, or if not, I'll say this is where we're going next to be able to work on that. Accountability is also about making progress. So if people are not moving ahead, then that's a time to have a conversation about what's going on. I mean, if it's not working, or if the client is getting stuck to a lot of blocks, they may not be coachable in this model, or coachable around what's going on for them. People who are trauma informed may not, have had trauma, may not be able to. People who are have no sort of empathy, if there are people that are unable to think about where other people are coming from, that they're not going to be too suitable for this. So accountability is checking in on progress, and if they're not making progress, to find out what's going on.
All right, great. And let's see, there's one more in the chat that I think we need to get to. To what extent do you evaluate your own saboteurs, i.e. the voice of the judge in this model?
Yeah, I had to learn over time. One of my trainers says that she realized, she put it well, I thought, I like the image, which is you have to be an empty vessel. And that's pretty hard to imagine yourself when we come with so much experience and just thinking about who we are and our own conflicts that we have, or things that we know generally work. It's taken me a while. It took me a while to be able to step back altogether and say, it's not about me, and whatever I think or know, it has absolutely nothing to do with me. And it's there. I'm just following a model here, and that's probably simplifying it, but it's keeping myself out of it. And if I am at all being triggered or found that I'm going into some kind of judgy thing, then I'll contact one of my peers and say, okay, you need to walk me through the model, because I need to look at what I'm getting triggered by myself. It's taken, it's a lot of self-work around making sure when you're dealing with people in conflict, because the tendency when people are really upset, I said earlier, to give advice, to try to help them out. If you're a rescuer, you'll have a challenge about that. When people give any kind of advice or opinions, it usually comes from what they would do. And so, it's not appropriate. It's not culturally appropriate to do that. So it takes work, but it is trying to remain as non-judgmental and an empty vessel.
I love that. That is a great picture, empty vessel. Let's see. So one other question I see here in the Q&A, do you teach principled / integrative negotiation, excuse me, as a way of helping others navigate a conflict?
No, I don't, but I don't, so I don't do teaching of, I mean, I've gone into organizations in the past and done conflict management training, but I don't teach my clients. It's all kind of them to do for themselves. But as an example earlier, if you're doing a group, I think probably some kind of teaching as a group of some sort is helpful if people get the same page about principles. And anything else?
We have one more. Can you walk through an example of how you guided someone through this cycle using a specific conflict?
Oh, that would take a really long time. But I'll give you examples of the kinds of goals that people have, and then what. So because remember, it's the model. Since it takes me 8 sessions, that would be far too long. But I can give you conceptually what goes on. So somebody comes with a goal. So let's say the goal is. I'll give you one example that happened recently with a manager in an organization that has to deliver a policy decision. I mentioned this earlier, that he knows there's going to be some pushback. He knows who's going to do it. And there are a few people in his team that he knows. So he told me about that. He told me so that's the goal. He told me what happened and what he gave me incidences about what went on with the other person and persons. And I said, let's do one at a time. We can do the model for each of them, because you have different triggers from different people. And so he chose the person who bugged him the most and who, as he said, he just sets me off, and started doing the merry-go-round with him and looking at, what it was that was specifically triggered him. So walk through the merry-go-round, looking at what his experience was with how this person is, really how this person acts, his tone of voice. I think someone asked a question about that. Tone of voice is, what does that reflect for you? What do you hear there? And it's really, tone of voice can be a very common trigger. So in this case, the tone of voice was a trigger, walked through the merry-go-round, and then looked at, because it was future oriented to the group, to what was going to be presented, what is it that what will his version be of what's going on firstly. And it was about that he's just an agent of the organization, that he doesn't fight for them, that he's just he just gives in to everything and he doesn't think about them and the staff. So what is it specifically? Walking around the merry-go-round for him, looking at it from that person's point of view. That the insight that came from that person was that it's true that he feels that this person bugs him, and that he gives him short shrift, that he makes his answers short, and he would be picking up that he doesn't like him. And he said, I think everybody thinks that. Until he sought coaching, he probably didn't think there's any reason to change it. But he did through that. He said that it's not going to help, and it's not going to help because people would know I'd react to that in the group. I can't do that anymore. So his choices were how he was going to present his information. Our stage was all about him doing that, what he was going to say, how he was going to say it. He practiced it. He tried different things to do. And then what would get in his way of proceeding? Nothing he has to figure out, however, if he gets blindsided by this person continuing to do what he's doing, even if he changes. So we're talking now about what's going to happen, what are the possibilities that he wants to be prepared for. So we've got lots of work to do. That started actually, it was probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago that started that. And then the meeting's in another week, so we've got some work to do. So that would give you an example about what we do. And yet, yes, the commitment is, he knows when it's all going to happen, what he has to do. So there's no logistical things other than to deal with that, the commitment part. Does that help? I did that in kind of quickly. Anything else?
A great example. Let's see, we did have one more question come in. How much do you focus on the aspiration, underlying needs and intentions of each person in the conflict versus their position during conflict coaching?
So I don't quite know what that means. The focus on their underlying needs and intentions versus their
This was
position. I don't
from-
think I know what that means.
Right. Yep. This was from, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Rashmi. If you want to explain a little bit more on what you're looking for here, that would be great.
Rashmi, you are able
Yeah,
to.
I'm
There you
sorry.
go. No, that's okay.
I was muted. Yeah, what I was trying to say here was oftentimes we get stuck on the position of somebody, like, just where they are at sort of the iceberg level. But how much during this conflict coaching are we kind of drilling down in terms of, what is the needs? What are the needs of each person? Like, what are the intentions? What are we trying to understand about what's underneath that position, whatever it may be?
I guess it depends how and when that comes out. It usually would be in the analysis piece in the end stage. Yeah, so I just ask a lot of questions like what's happening, it's the needs are specific to, and their interest is specific to why they're in coaching. So if I hear something that's contrary to that, then I'll say, how's that connected? If it's on, I'll say, how's that connected? It's really, it's specific to what they've brought to them to coaching. If other things come up, then I would say, and so I'm hearing a lot of other things happening here. What do you want to be focusing on today? I heard you mention this or this, but their needs come out in the merry-go-round under the triggers. What their needs were there. What they want to do about it for their needs comes out later. So all I can say is I trust the model that'll take me through each step as people, and you'll hear whatever else they need to go to, and then I'll ask the relevance and where that's about and what it means to them. I guess it's not getting carried away off to something that isn't relevant to why they're in front of you. So I don't know if that answers very well, Rashmi.
Yeah, thank you so much. It does.
Okay, so I'm going to start to wind down here. There'll be two books that I have that I've written to tell you about. You'll get these slides if you're at all interested in any of that. And I'm going to also, you'll be able to download one of the chapters. It's a Conflict Mastery Questions to Guide You. I love questions. I've written a book about it. And you can download the second chapter of that book at no cost. So the password is there, and you will get those slides and information on me if you need it. And I want to thank you again. Any last minute thoughts, comments, questions?
Thank you so much, Cinnie. Very helpful. A lot of thank yous in the chat here.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Great information. And Allison, yes, we will be your local chapter. We'll send out the certificates. So just give us a couple of days to get that sent over to them. And we did post the article in the chat, but it'll also come with your certificate as well.
Good stuff. Thank you. Oh, lovely. Thanks, everybody. Lovely to hear from you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Cinnie, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a wonderful presentation. We were so happy to have you present.
Oh, thanks very much. My pleasure. That's great.
Wonderful.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody. Bye-bye.
Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.